So welcoming everyone to our first encounter at Bridge. This is on the topic, unemployable graduates, who's to blame? Every year, India creates 12 million graduates and only 7 million jobs. Yet 63% of Indian employers still struggle to find the skills they need. For long, India has been faced with an unenviable employability problem with no solution in sight. Does the problem lie with our education system that encourages irrelevant rote learning, or with industry that is unclear about its expectations? Let's find out. I'd like to begin by introducing our speakers who could not be more relevant to the debate topic at hand. And I'd request our speakers to switch on your video and thank you both for taking out the time. Representing academia, we have Professor Hrishikesh Krishnan. Professor Krishnan is the director of IIM Bangalore, a prolific author, columnist, and professor of management. He was a visiting scholar at the Center for the Advanced Study of India, University of Pennsylvania, and at the Indian School of Business. He has held the Jamuna Raghavan Chair in Entrepreneurship at IIMB and was featured on the Thinkers 50s list of the most influential management thinkers from India. Welcome, Professor Krishnan.
Hi.
Representing industry, we have Rohit Kapoor. Rohit is the CEO of OYO, India and Southeast Asia. He has led OYO India, transforming the business across financials, partners, and customer NPS. A seasoned professional with over 20 years of experience, he has worked in various leadership positions at several organizations, including Max India Limited and McKinsey & Company. He also dons the hat of an investor across domains like PropTech, Health Tech, and FinTech. Welcome, Rohit. For the benefit of our audience, I would like to walk through the format of the next 50 minutes. We will have 3 sections. In each section, I will be asking one question to each of our speakers. Further, each speaker will also get a chance to ask one question to the other speaker. If time permits, we will end by taking questions from the audience. For the audience, we also have a reflection wall that is shared in the chat, and you can contribute to the discussion as we move along. So Rohit and Professor Krishnan, do you have any questions? And if not, we can get started.
Yeah, get started.
I'm good to go.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So starting with section 1, matching student mindsets to industry expectations. Rohit, my first question to you. With so much change taking place in the nature of work, as well as in the skills needed for success, is industry being clear on what it wants or needs from academia and students? Can companies do more than just publish a JD?
Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you. I think, can companies do more? The short answer is yes, right? JDs are often very confusing. I have myself found most JDs to be unable to explain what is really meant in the job, right? So there's always a huge room for improvement there. So no arguments there at all.
Okay, thank you, for that honest thought. But if you were to expand that a little further and essentially, think about what else could industry do beyond just the JD to be able to clarify the skill expectations that it needs from students.
Look, I think, Nikhil, that is a very, very iterative process, right? Because that question assumes that industry is one, right? It is not one, it is there are 100 kinds of industries, 100 kinds of needs, one. And even for a single corporation, that need is ever evolving. So it's a very dynamic state on what skill is relevant, especially, I think, look, every generation says this, but it just feel like to me that this is the fastest pace I am running in my 20 years in industry. And the rate of change is very fast. So you can be only as clear to anybody else as you are yourself, right? And I think that is a huge challenge for this constant distillation of what's the present reality of that company or industry being transferred to academia. And look, academia is not a one-shot option where suddenly at the age of 22, you switch around a candidate and say, here's years I've swung this person to who you wanted. That person is a product of almost like 22 or I don't know, 18 years of education, right? So it is a very difficult question, and this is the honest answer I have.
Great, thanks for that. So you're saying that there's so many diverse sets of needs from industry, and it can be a bit challenging to communicate some of those expectations. Professor Krishnan, if I can come to you, taking into consideration the rapid scale and scope of change, as well as these diverse needs from industry, what is academia doing to foster some of the foundational skills like learning to learn and self-awareness? Now, as a student, if I don't know what my strengths and weaknesses are, how can I even begin think about upskilling for the right job?
Yeah, it's a good question, Nikhil. Thank you. So many of us do try to help students in that process. For example, what used to be our placement office is today called a Career Development Services Office. And the CDS ideally is expected to go beyond just linking students to jobs. The idea is through lots of workshops and other interactions to expose the students to what's happening in industry, to help them assess their own strengths and weaknesses, to sort of guide them to find a better alignment of fit between their own skills and what industry is demanding. So I think many of us do try our best to make that happen. That's as far as the CDS is concerned. Of course, in the classroom, we all realize that things are changing quite fast. Just take a simple area like digital marketing. So I'm often told that what's the in thing in digital marketing today is unlikely to be what is the in thing in digital marketing 6 months from now. So we are better off teaching our students the basics or the fundamentals, or basically getting them to understand the core concepts. And maybe they'll need to understand the latest tools and techniques when they go into a company and find out what tools that particular company is using. So I think that's where, institutes like IIMs, that's what we are good at. We basically give a good foundation in all the core aspects of management. And then, given that the students are smart, when they go into companies, they can figure out how the company does things and adapt their knowledge to the company's processes.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So, Rohit, you now have a chance to ask your first question to Professor Krishnan on this particular section. So please go ahead.
Professor, this is, I'm very used to professors asking me questions, so this is a great opportunity. Sir, my question to you is, as you think about the topic, what is the most unclear thing in your mind or the academia's mind today, right? Something which is you don't have an answer to and you're struggling with.
So the thing I'm struggling with today is how should we mold our curriculum at this point of time? Let me give you a specific example of this. So we are in the middle of an MBA curriculum review, which we do every few years. And in order to sort of get the curriculum aligned with industry expectations, we have been reaching out to a whole range of industry stakeholders. And I've been asking them fairly basic questions like, what do you think are the key things that should go into the MBA today? How should the MBA today be different from what it was, say, 10 years or 20 years ago, and so on? And reflecting the point you made earlier, Rohit, I get a really wide range of answers. If I talk to a company which is cutting edge digital, then I get answers like, you should throw out whatever you are teaching and, start ground up. If I talk to a company which is a very traditional industrial manufacturing company, they tell me, well, nothing all that much has changed. This is the wrappers and things around. We are trying to digitize our processes, but otherwise the core remains the same. So you guys just continue doing what you're doing, but do teach the students something about the latest digital trends. And somewhere in the middle, if I talk to, say, companies like the FMCG industry, they say, yeah, well, the core fundamentals have changed, but yes, the go-to-market has become quite different. Maybe today the buying process of customers has changed. So you need to be able to, have a the concepts, but you also need to be able to cover what's happening today. So in short, I mean, we get a wide spectrum of responses as to what we should be doing in our curriculum. And to kind of summarize it in a very sort of pithy way, the core issue I'm dealing with is, should our change in curriculum be just evolutionary or should it be revolutionary? And this doesn't seem to be very easy to answer this question.
Fair.
Great. Thank you, Professor Krishnan. And now you have a chance to ask your question to Rohit. Maybe, and I'll leave that to you, but go ahead.
Yeah, Rohit, I think I have a pretty similar question to you. So if you look at, the way your company is evolving now, when you're looking at hiring, and I'll restrict my question to management graduates because that's what I'm familiar with. How would you expect a management graduate today to be different from, say, about 10 years ago?
So I was a management graduate 15 years ago.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, great.
So
just
that
compare with that.
it's a good reference point. I think significantly different. I think if I did not have the experience of last 15 years and I was stepping out with the same kind of mindset and education 15 years back, I'll be in a lot of trouble today, right? And let me summarize what the 3-4 things I think are sort of deltas that will be very, very valuable to find. One is, I think with the job market having expanded, job and opportunity market, I don't call it a job market anymore, the opportunity market, right? For having, and specifically for top tier B schools, again, very targeted answer. The sense of entitlement is a little bit troubling, right? And that comes in the way of the acceptance of the need to learn massively in a new frontier, right? Which is outside your previous experience, outside of B school. I just wish we can find ways to reduce the sense of entitlement, right? I think that is my number one change, because I think that it's also correlated to the number of opportunities, right? In 15 years back, you had 2 or 3 great options. Today, you have 10 great options, right, to go to, which is sort of a bit of an antithesis to this debate title. But for the top tier B schools, that's true, right? The second point I'll say is, we really need people who are fantastic problem solvers, right? And problem solving can be taught; it is not born, right? How do you sort of take ambiguity and show both the acceptance that this is a tough situation? I don't have an answer, but the ability to structure and resolve it and move forward, right? Third is appreciation of technology. I don't think everybody needs to be a technology person, but the appreciation of what the range of technology can do to your problem solving and the way you think about an issue. So for example, if most people are asked to start a new team, they first say, okay, let me draw the org chart and figure out who all do I need. Versus saying, what is this team? Does it even need one more person beyond me? Right? And is there a product approach to this? And then let me figure out what's the right team. And another thing is, I think it is, in a way, we are looking for back to basics people, great problem solving, significantly high degree of written and oral communication. And written communication, I think that is where the real trouble is, Professor, if I point out. People just don't write good emails anymore. It's such a struggle to figure out, what are you exactly trying to say, right? Keep it simple, avoid all the jargon. Just tell me in simple Hindi or English, whatever you need to tell me. I think some of those basics are far more valuable, and an attitude of a learner without entitlement that really separates from those who are fantastic versus those who have a lot of potential but sort of don't get there fast. I think so in a way, traits are becoming far more valuable than did you really learn Kotler or you did not learn Kotler. Frankly, I couldn't care less. Right?
Great, that's very useful. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Professor Krishnan and Rohit. And so now moving to the second section of this discussion, which is really the, taking in from Rohit's question, which is the curriculum, faculty, and infra. So if we were to talk about let's say the traits that Rohit spoke about, how is academia thinking about the updation of this curriculum and faculty? Essentially there is this conversation that, students spend 4 to 6 years studying in college where they learn the theories of a DVD in the age of Netflix. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on just, how we're thinking about curriculum, faculty, and infra.
Yeah, it's a good point, Nikhil. I think the way to go is multifold. One is, of course, to try and make things more practical and hands-on. There's a great book called Grasp by Sanjay Sharma, who is a professor at MIT and head of the Open Learning Initiative at MIT. And he has some wonderful examples in his book of how MIT has made cutting edge practical education. So like if you're learning robotics at MIT, you're learning the theory in the morning and you're actually out there in the lab in the afternoon, practicing that and trying to make it happen. So I think one of the big challenges for all of us, and particularly for our engineering schools, is to be able to adopt that kind of an approach and really to upgrade the labs and the practice side of things by many orders of magnitude, so that what people are doing is really the current stuff. Coming to management, I think we need to sort of embrace a lot of the new things that are happening in the industry. The way they are doing that right now is, of course, by getting in more adjunct faculty, getting in more industry talks, essentially giving much more exposure to the students. But I think they would really benefit from doing more real-time projects in some of the emerging areas, particularly related to digital and data. At IMB, we are fortunate. We have a data center and an analytics lab that does a lot of industry work. And often we are able to give subsets of those problems to the students to work on. So that's, I think, another important way of making sure that people learn hands-on. Traditionally, we have always followed somewhat of a Socratic approach. We've emphasized things like case studies and basically problem solving, which doesn't have a unique answer, like the kind of open-ended problem solving Rohit was mentioning earlier. That's why I think many of our top school graduates in India have done quite well, because they've been trained to think in that open-ended way. But I think one feedback we keep getting from the industry is that maybe some of the contexts in which our case studies are located are getting obsolete fast. Perhaps we don't have enough cases representing the kind of dilemmas you would face in a digital company or a highly data-driven company. So one of the challenges in academia is to keep pace with the need for teaching material, which reflects what's happening in industry now. And this is it's an ongoing challenge for us. But when we are not able to do that, we fall back on, as I mentioned earlier, getting industry speakers, practitioners. So I think that's the way to go as far as curriculum design is concerned.
Thank you so much. So three things that I'm taking away is essentially making learning more hands-on, contextualizing the case studies, and adding adjunct faculty as a way to improve the curriculum. So Rohit, coming now to you, is it fair to expect only academia to own the updating of the curriculum, especially when things are changing as fast as let's say the Netflix algorithm? What percentage of an employee's working time can be sent contributing to helping students with real world experience, let's say things on projects or mentoring? So would love your thoughts on that.
I think, Nikhil, you asked two questions in one. So let me take the first one, which is it fair to expect only academia to change curriculum? I think curriculum change is a very complex subject, right? I have, after coming out of B school, I've also taught as a visiting faculty for many years. And so I totally understand that the world of academia operates with its own distinct rhythm, right? So yes, it is not the only job of the academia, but I think it is also the job of the academia to be willing to sit across opinion, which could be very, very radically different, and even constructively confrontationist, right? I think that appetite has to be there. I don't know how much of that is happening at present. I think that Manthan is good because it'll always, as with all great outcomes, will land somewhere in the middle, right? But that will be quite valuable. So it is for the academia to reach out. I think it's very hard for industry to sort of wade into academia without a open door, which is not very easy to sort of find at times, right? The second thing is, should students do more hands-on stuff, as you were asking? Yes, I think I would love a curriculum which is 3 years, includes 4 internships, right? Now, practically, cost-wise, logistically, how practical is that? Because I've done a 1-year MBA, by the way, right? So let me qualify that I'm probably the wrong person to be saying this, but maybe at the undergrad level, right? Really mix it up with a lot more, encourage gap years, right? Today, if you have a gap year, people ask in a resume saying there must be something wrong, right? No, there's nothing wrong. The person decided that they need a certain amount of time to go out and experience things so as to appreciate education far more, right? I think appreciating education is the biggest gift one can have as a student, right? So anything which leads to that outcome is well worth it.
Great. So you spoke about, constructive disagreement, having academia reaching out with an open door sort of policy, and, the idea of a gap year. So Professor Krishnan, your question to Rohit.
Yeah, before I ask a question, let me just add one point that I missed earlier very quickly. That in another way of making this happen is to get faculty and industry folks to teach together. I took this point from Rohit's idea of the Manthan. We've tried it in a few instances. It's been quite, it's exciting. It's also challenging, but it really makes a difference. For example, one of our faculty is now working with K. Ganesh, who's been a serial entrepreneur and he's been behind many successful enterprises, to develop a course on new business models. And Ganesh has really on the ground practical experience of starting some of the best startups, and combined with the sort of conceptual ideas that our faculty have, this could be a great course. It's being designed right now as I speak, but I'm sort of foreseeing that this could be quite interesting going forward. Yeah, so my question for Rohit. So Rohit, how cooperative would you be, or how open would you be, for example, if we were to reach out to you and say, can we work with OYO to find some more practice-oriented projects, or to get some folks from your company to come and be part of our teaching team? Because I know you guys are doing a whole lot of new stuff, so I'm just wondering whether you have the bandwidth, or would you be able to make that happen?
So, sir, my own sense is that we'll be hugely receptive, right? For 2-3 reasons, and not all of them altruistic in nature, right? One is I do feel it's great exposure for our emerging leaders to be able to go and coherently transmit or project out what they are doing in a coherent manner for others to learn. I think it's great development for them. So I personally, I've done this for 8-9 years, gone and taught at B school. So I have experienced it and I'm very supportive, right? And also secondly, I think what has really become very easy to do now because of what we had, for example, the Zoom and the virtual settings, that you did need to find those 2 hours, right? You don't need to find the day to travel and the day to come back. So it's become incredibly easy to be able to plug in and contribute. I think third thing is I also think that beyond this, we are just very far away from, let's say, the US model where the industry and academia collaborate very extensively on research. And that's another area where I do feel there's an incredible opportunity for premier institutions and good organizations to come together and contribute to research. But we don't do enough research in the country.
Great.
Our answer is yes.
Your turn.
Yeah. So my question to you is that given the way things are shaping up, right? And with a lot of undergrads becoming almost as competent because of so many self-learning tools out there available, is MBA sort of losing its edge to the undergrad career, and is it overpriced, right? And I'm not referring to the IIMs in general. Like if you take the MBA world globally, is it now an overpriced option to a good undergrad, high quality undergrad degree?
So I think internationally, what you said is already visible to a degree. We have seen, particularly in the US and some other markets, decline in MBA enrollments. This has not affected the very top end, perhaps like a Harvard or a Stanford. But if you come a little way down the list, it has affected the schools. Some schools, even some big names, have gone as far as closing their MBA programs or morphing them into something else. So in general, I think what you're saying has some validity. It perhaps has not become so much a trend in India for different set of reasons, maybe. One is, I think, still the undergraduate education perhaps needs to improve quite a bit, except in some selected institutions. So there's still a kind of gap. There's also maybe, this is a controversial thing, but maybe some of our kids also mature a bit slowly in the sense that it takes them a little few more years to really, get to the point where they can become good organizational members and contributors and so on. So I think that's another reason why maybe this couple of years of MBA helps. I mean, some people have derogatorily called, MBAs just finishing schools, which might be, it might be partly true that we do finishing activity as well, but maybe it's important in India when sometimes the undergrad education is not on such a firm footing. But of course, the broad point you're making is already happening in India as well in some sectors. For example, we do know that consulting firms, for example, have started visiting IIT campuses. You do have a lot of the financial companies also visiting there. And in tech, of course, in any case, a lot of the hiring is from the tech schools. But my own sense, just to conclude, is that in India, the decline in relevance of good MBA programs is some distance away. And it's also because we have huge growth plans, even if they've got slightly slowed down during the pandemic. And if all the growth we want has to happen, we will need a good number of MBAs as well. That's my estimate. I think in the West, in the developed world, maybe the kind of growth has slowed down or it's not happening. So maybe the need for MBAs has kind of come down.
Thank you. Now moving into the final section of our discussion, which is really the future of skill-based hiring versus degrees. So Rohit, my question to you. Assuming industry is fixated on skills and believes that academia is not helping students to be job ready, why is a degree still a gate pass to get shortlisted by the HR team? Is industry looking beyond credentials for evidence of skills, and what could the future of skill-based hiring look like?
I think not as much as industry should, right? And the simple reason is it is very hard to assess skill, right? It's incredibly hard to assess skill. Whereas if you've gone through a process, and I call an MBA or undergrad, it is a process. You go in as a raw material, you come out as a finished product, right, of some nature. Then you trust that process to have done something for you, right? It will vary across different individuals, but it allows you to get to some base level of understanding and assurance of some quality. Now, can I argue that the person who's come from, let's say, an IIM or ISB is better to someone who has never finished school? I cannot, right? Because there will be those many individuals who are far more talented than any product of a business. But trouble is how to find them, right? And how to assess them. I don't think that mechanism or tools exist in adequate nature today to be an institutional outcome. Does it happen by exception? It does happen. If people say that, look, degrees are not needed for an employment opportunity, I think that will be a PR statement today more than a real intent statement in most cases, right? And that's where the struggle is. Like, I genuinely don't know, but having taken a filter, then it's easier to then sieve through that and say, we've got 100 applications from business schools. These are 10 which are more relevant to what I want to do, than to go out in the sea of 100,000 people and try to find those 10 from very, very unorganized sources. So I think as a business opportunity, if somebody can create that startup or ecosystem where you can almost take anybody and give it to a company, say that we have channeled it, will be a very interesting idea.
Great, thanks. Professor Krishnan, my question to you now is, and I'd love to get your views on what Rohit mentioned about, being able to assess a skill. I'd love your thoughts on that, as a thread. But can the accreditation system allow for micro credentials, and if yes, how? And how are colleges thinking about credentialing in the future to be able to embrace skill-based hiring?
No, see, Nikhil, I think, at its core, a good college or university education is more than just a bundle of skills. There is a whole socialization process that happens. There's a lot you learn through teamwork. You just learn how to be a better or a more effective human being just by being in contact with a lot of other people of a similar age. So I think we sometimes make a mistake by thinking that all you learn in a college or a university is just, some set of knowledge and skills. I think there's a whole lot of other stuff which goes along with it, which might be intangible, invisible, but is still important. So just think about a company who is hiring somebody with some set of skills. But that person has never gone through college, has never worked with other people. A lot of his interpersonal angularities would not have kind of got rubbed off. I think that would be, to my mind, that's not the best way of going about hiring people. Somewhere in between is probably not a bad idea. So I hear these days that many of the IT services companies are saying we are not going to campus anymore. Yes, we want you to have a degree as a qualification, but we really want to see what you can do in terms of coding, in terms of cracking tough problems. So we'll run a hackathon or some other equivalent, and we will select based on that, and we don't care which particular college you came from. Now, something like that to me makes better sense because they've had the college experience, they've gone through all the other social and sort of interpersonal processes that I just mentioned. And yet we know in the corporate context, they'll finally have to crack those tough problems. So we want to choose those people who are really good at cracking those problems. So today I would imagine that kind of combination makes a good sense. I would still be a little hesitant to hire just for skills. I think that would be maybe taking things a bit too far. Now, the other question you asked about micro-credentials and accreditation and so on, it's beginning to happen, I think, more in the digital space and the online education space. We at IIM Bangalore are thinking of offering a bachelor's in what we are calling digital entrepreneurship, which will be to build a kind of next generation entrepreneurs, where we are looking at essentially a whole lot of online courses, but very interactive online courses, where the students will learn all these different skills and knowledge and all required to make this happen. But we are looking at it happening in 3 phases. So maybe the first phase would be a kind of certification. The second phase would be equivalent to a diploma, and the final phase might be equivalent to a degree. But at each phase, at the end of each phase, you would have developed a certain package of skills and knowledge which will enable you to do something which is fairly well defined. So this is, of course, it's right in the building stage right now, and it'll probably be quite some time before we actually get to launching a program like that. But that's one way of going forward. Now, linking that to accreditation, of course, is something we need to look at. I think the government has already got guidelines now for what you need to offer online degrees. I think there's still a bit of a struggle in completely delinking the online degrees from the classroom ones. So some of the language you see being used in the online degree documentation is still somewhat a carryover from the classroom degree stuff. But hopefully that will change, and then accreditation will also be able to kick in to sort of identify which are the courses which need to be approved or which can be approved and so on. Right now, the government has done that by proxy, by saying if you're within the top 100 ranks of NIRF, then you can go ahead and offer online degrees. So in a way, they're just assuming that ranking is taking care of your quality. But at some stage, we'll also need perhaps a little more careful accreditation of the online courses themselves. So sorry, that's a rather long-winded answer to your question, but that's what I would say.
Thank you. That did explain a bunch of things I was keen to know more about. Rohit, your final question to Professor Krishnan.
Professor Krishnan, what do you miss the most in the admits to IIM Bangalore? If you had an ask of the undergraduate in the school system to give you better outcomes on one or two dimensions, what will that be?
In general, I would be much happier if people were a little more distinctive and tried to stand out a little more individually. I think there tends to be a bit too much of, I mean, it's not a nice word, but herd mentality is the term that comes to mind. And a little bit too much of being affected by what your peers are doing, rather than you standing for something distinctive. When I just think back to my college days, in the long run, the guys who did the most interesting things were the ones who stood for something distinctive right then. I mean, all those years ago. And those who merged into the crowd, they're still part of the crowd in a way. So my, the thing I would really like to see is, people having a distinctive point of view, their own distinctive skill set, their own ambitions and goals. And then, there's so many, as you rightly said, there's so many opportunities out there. They should be able to go and then make those dreams come true. So that's what I would really like.
So on that note, I have two kids. So my younger daughter, when she was even younger, about 4 or 5, I was teaching her maths one day. And I asked her that if a tree had like 1,000 mangoes, and that kind of sound like you take 50 of it, how many are left? Her answer to me was like, have you ever seen a tree with 1,000 mangoes, right? So which tree are you talking about? So, I think that was quite revealing on how a child thinks, and how we sort of force fit them in the same direction, saying that was the wrong question to ask, or this is not the question, answer the question you've been asked. It all starts from there, I guess. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Great. Professor Krishnan, your final question to Rohit.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just take a cue from Rohit's question and ask him something similar. So if you were to think of an ideal either college or MBA graduate whom you would like to hire in OYO today, what would you really like to see in that person, which perhaps you're not seeing enough of?
I think, first of all, we do see good people. So I must say that one is the current crop of people who are coming in are just distinctively, on an average, better than what I have dealt with in the past, right? So having said that, there are 2-3 things which are very, very delightful when you find them in a candidate who's just come in. One is complete lack of entitlement, right? I think that is, and I've used this twice now in this show. So it means something to me. I think it's about forgetting what you were yesterday and what title or what degree you had, and starting zero base every quarter, if not every day, right? I think that spirit is very important, right? And that is valuable in a young MBA graduate. It's as valuable in a CXO joining the company from another organization, because you're practically as good as your last day was, right? Second is unbridled enthusiasm to learn, right? I think there are some who are real, I call learning magnets, right? They'll get attached to any situation, any person. They will go out, talk to the consumer, talk to the partners, talk to anybody to learn. I think they create the most lasting impact and they create the most distinctive impact, right? And third is really, I wish, the batch system has its last ritual at the colleges and no more, right? Because I still find people so attached to, oh, my batch average is so and so, my batch that has happened. I think that batch comparison comes up in evaluations and appraisals like 6 years later, right? And you say that 6 years, everybody has a different life, a different outcome, right? And people are still comparing. And I think that Sharma ji ka beta wala mentality, which is embedded by, maybe we can blame our parents for that, right? Because whenever we scored 95, they said, Sharma ji ke beta ka to 99 aaya tha. So that never goes away. And it's very, very integral to our DNA and thinking, and does come in the way of organization culture, comes in the way of your own progress, and more importantly, happiness, right? I still find super successful, well-paid young people not so happy, and that's not a great outcome. I think it's a long struggle to reach where they have, and I think people should, in current language, just chill a little more.
Great point. Yeah.
Great. So, we still have some more time. So I'll ask both of you one more question, So Professor Krishnan, from some of the things that Rohit has mentioned, if there was one thing that you would like to take away to be able to help with solving the unemployability challenge, what would that be? And Rohit, the same question for you.
One thing to solve. See, I think, Nikhil, first of all, we didn't actually address this head on, but this unemployability question itself is a strange question, right? So India, I don't know about other countries, but I know one thing about India. There are people looking for jobs and there are companies looking for people. And sometimes the two don't meet, okay? So the big question is, why don't the two meet? Okay. So part of the reason, I mean, we've discussed other things during this discussion, but part of the reason is that, in a way, they don't have the right expectations on both sides. And I think the thing we need to do is to sort of bring those expectations closer. So I think Rohit already mentioned several of the things that can help do that. But one thing I would say is, particularly in a fast-changing environment, it may be a bit challenging if companies expect people who are going to start producing from day one. So you are going to require some orientation, some transition to help people become productive. And the danger is, if you have people who are actually productive from day one, it is possibly because they have very narrow skills which are suited to what you're doing now. But those guys may not be able to meet the learnability challenge of tomorrow. So you have to somehow balance this. So I think you need smart people who can quickly learn on the job. Companies need, in India in general, and I'm not talking about OYO, need to invest a little more in training and bringing people up to speed. And they should be able to make that transition quickly. I think that would be a better thing than expecting people to be just job ready from day one. Because just to repeat what I said earlier, the guy who's job ready from day one may not be your ideal employee, because it's possible all his skill set is very narrow, and he or she might fizzle out after the current skill set is obsolete.
Thank you. Rohit, over to you.
Yeah, I will say that two parts. One is for the millions who are graduating or becoming undergraduates today. We don't have the luxury of saying, let's fix the school system, right? Because while that is true, what happens to the millions who will go out in the next few years. So there, I think industry academia bridge programs is the best way, right? Where you're able to construct programs together to roughly translate people you want to the people you have, or right? And that there are several great examples of that happening. It's not an unknown. I find that to be the most significant intervention, right? Rather than really moan about the fact that what's happening or not happening. The second, I think, which is a generational change, is equally important, because we have to think about this problem not in 3-4 years, in a 10-20 year time frame, is to really go back and look at what we have done to our school system, right? I genuinely think the problem starts there, right? Because we don't teach people, or teach is the wrong word. We don't allow kids to learn, right? I think kids need to be allowed to learn. They don't need to be taught to learn, right? Their faculties, their abilities are so high that they need a fertile ground, and they'll become a huge tree, each one of them. But we just want the same kid replicated over and over again, right? And I know there's a lot, and I can tell you that even the top 5% of parents in India, while they profess to be wanting a wider exposure to their kids, get troubled with the first bad marks the kid gets in school. Disproportionately troubled. They don't get enough trouble if the kid loses a sport game in school, or does a bad painting, or breaks the carpentry class furniture, whatever. That's all learning. But if there's one, 10 out of 13 maths, all hell breaks loose in the same household, which sort of talks about allowing the kid to learn and move at their own pace. I think we need to be far more accepting of alternate experimentation with education at that level, because if we get that right, and look, there's a valid counter argument to this, saying our road system of learning has produced fantastic leaders across the world, from IITs and IIMs and other places. So I'm a product of that. But by the way, let me confess, I remember nothing from my school education. Absolutely nothing. I cannot teach my kids. Right? My wife still can. I can't. Because I was an absolute master at road learning. You give me an exam, I'll crack it. Right? But next day, I don't know anything about the topic. Okay? But over time, I had exposure, which I just was at the right place at the right time, maybe to change myself. But not everyone gets that opportunity. And there's something to be said about how deep that change has to be for us not to be discussing this in 2035.
Yeah, Nikhil, just to echo what Rohit was saying, this book I mentioned, Grasp, it's all about how, learning is the key thing and not teaching, and how the learning process really influences how long you retain things. So I think I would completely agree with Rohit. There's a lot of work we have to do on fixing the learning process.
Great. Well, thank you, Professor Krishnan and Rohit, for such an energetic discussion. Clearly there are multiple threads to this challenge for both academia and industry that we need to co-own and co-solve. Appreciate the both of you taking out the time for this, and thank you again, and wish you a great day ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good to meet you, Rohit, and thanks, Nikhil.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Privileged to be on the same panel as you, and thank you, Nikhil. Thank you.